At the cast party, Kate Hepburn came, of course, and Katherine Houghton and the entire cast. And Stanley made a speech, and he cried again. It was almost as if they all knew that Spence didn't have very long. But we just didn't expect it to happen within 2 weeks after he had completed this film.
My aunt was able to do tears a lot.
What's the matter?
And one sees them in lots of films. But what I do know, and can be sure of, is that the speech at the end is as much a speech of Spencer to Kate as it is Matt Drayton to Christina Drayton. No question about that. When people ask me what it was like to make Guess Who's Coming to Dinner and how much fun it must have been, I have to say, no, it wasn't fun. And the reason why it wasn't fun is because right from the very beginning, we knew Spencer was dying. One always felt as though it might not ever really happen. I just feel extremely lucky that I had the opportunity to be part of such a project and with so many extraordinary people who were part of our American film history. Spencer bringing a new kind of a man to films in the 30s. Sidney, the first black man to be a leading man. Katharine Hepburn, one of the very first women to play a strong, opinionated, feisty, independent woman. Stanley, a creator of a genre in Hollywood that was absolutely unique, the genre of celebrating humanism, tolerance, all of the best elements of human nature, and to be part of that.
I think most all of Stanley's films are a landmark, document of the history of what this country was going through at the time he made specific subject matters.
We knew we were making an important film at the time, but I'm sure that none of us realized how important it was going to be in terms of the social issues that it addressed.
1967, and just that time period, was a very, very powerful period for, not just for African Americans, but for our nation. This was the heart of the civil rights movement. There was a time when people had been hearing names like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and people knew about the work of President Kennedy. And so to think about a movie where the whole issue of interracial dating and marriage is going to be addressed, whether it be in Hollywood or in your neighborhood, it was just taboo for you to even think about.
It is love that finally carries the day. Quite properly, all of that falls away. Even though Spencer Tracy says, what you're doing is illegal in however many states, 17 states, and forecasts quite correctly that you're still going to have problems. But the movie sets us up to watch two lovers coming together, and nothing is going to keep them apart.
Your daughter said that there's no problem. She said, my dad is a lifelong fighting liberal who loathes race prejudice and has spent his whole life fighting against discrimination. She said, my parents, well, they'll welcome me with open arms. And I said, oh, I sure want to meet them.
I think films like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner can help change history. Films very often make you feel not only differently about that subject, but it starts you thinking, and it's a chain reaction. And I think this film definitely changed how we feel about interracial marriage.
A lot of us felt that it was one of those important moments, and whether or not it was going to be accepted by the movie public or public in general. We didn't know if that was ever going to happen.
There were lines around the block. I don't mean 2 or 3 lines. I mean 15 to 20 lines around the block to see this film, and they just never stopped coming.
It was a sign of acceptance For years, blacks have wanted whites to just accept us for who we are. That's how we build a better nation. That we come together as a people and say, you know what, this is going to work. I think a film like this has the potential to influence people hundreds of years from now, because these issues will always be relevant. And when you look at a movie like this 40 years later, and you see that there were people who had the courage to take the risk of making a movie about an issue that was taboo. And not just a movie about it, but a movie where there was a positive outcome.
Well, Tilly, when the hell are we going to get some dinner?
And of course, that movie changed the way people thought then, and it will change the way people think today. And 40 years from now, it will change the way people think, because people are always going to need some sort of motivation to begin to look at people for who they are and not at the color of their skin.
When I think back to 1967, a lot of memories attack me. Number one, it was a very amazing year for my dear friend Sidney Poitier, and he came over to counsel me like he always does, and he's always been my big brother to keep me out of trouble. He said, Quincy, this is the year, I think this is going to be our year from now on, because that year he did To Serve With Love, and we did In the Heat of the Night together, and he did a film by the brilliant Stanley Kramer called Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which was a profound statement at that time, because there were not a lot of black films made by major directors of any color. I remember the emotions involved there. You know, I've been involved in mixed marriages and so forth, interracial relationships, which doesn't mean a thing to me, because it's got nothing to do with that. It's about 24 hours a day of living your life and getting your kids right and everything else. And thank God we've traveled the world enough to understand it's still about a man and a woman. I understood the dynamics, you know, that of what it meant back in that time. This was a year before Dr. King got assassinated. And I've always had the images of the courage and the vision on everybody's behalf, from Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn and Sidney Poitier, but mainly the main vision of Stanley Kramer, who had the courage and the vision to know that this was a necessary thing to do in the States at that time. And it's always will remain in my mind as a big piece of our sociology, because it was a very sociological statement at that time, and a brilliant piece of filmmaking, like all the rest of his work has been. It was a brilliant film that made a big social statement at that time. It was a powerful commentary on American sociology, and took a lot of courage to do it at that time. I was happy that Sidney made that little walk over to the Sunset Towers that day to talk about that, because he was right. That was a year that it all happened for us. And Guess Who's Coming to Dinner had a major, major part in putting him even further up in the stratosphere than he already was. And Stanley Kramer, wherever you are, man, you left an amazing legacy for us. God bless him. Thank you.
What I dealt with was the matter of image in motion pictures in the small sense, and image of the nation, the United States, in the larger sense, more importantly even than most of us realize. The motion picture maker, whether he likes it or not, is thrust very much into the political arena these days. All of us seek for truth. Creative people certainly seek for truth, and I think that every well-meaning government official who goes to bed at night with the dream of peace, the way out, seeks truth. And I would say that there is no way to come closest to the truth than by an open, free, total distribution of that which we do as creators, and that which mirrors what we are and what we aspire to be, rather than only that side of us which we intrude upon people anyhow. We must be true, in my opinion, to our legacy, which is to examine, criticize, break down, reestablish and therefore progress.
I think his films were about searching for answers. It was almost like an inquiry into the subject matter, the way he approached it. And I just, you know, I'm a fan of Stanley's simply because they're films that I not only remember and inspired me when I was a young filmmaker, but as I got to know Stanley and later on in his life, we were both making films that a lot of people said, they're always trying to give a message, you know. It wasn't so much a message as it was trying to find answers and to make films that probed the psyche of the country.
I'm looking for the truth. Well, you know, after all these years in a complex society, it isn't so easy to find the truth. I think if you stick, one of the troubles with that is if you're looking for the truth, you find part of the truth, and on part of the truth, some of the biggest lies in the world have been built.
He always said, I just want to entertain and say something, but he never really believed that he made a message film. But I believe he did.
He was into lifting up rocks and exposing the ills of our society. I mean, he was a serious filmmaker, but he had a great sense of humor as a man, and I think he brought that to all of his productions.
The films that he produced and directed, just and always his own man, never let the studios control his films, did them his way. He's just one of the people I really admire.
I would say Stanley Kramer is an American. He liked America. He liked what was going on in America. And he didn't say, well, I'll go back to my town in Estonia. I'll write about I met a girl when I was 5. He said, America is what I do films about. And he did the nuclear problems, the race problems, the macho problems of the wild ones.
Don't push anybody.
I think most all of Stanley's films are a landmark, document of the history of what this country was going through at the time he made specific subject matter.
Racial inequality, all this kind of stuff, it just wasn't done. You couldn't do that. And this picture came along and did it, and there was a milestone. And his films had milestones in them.
Whether he was dealing with the future of the world after an atomic crisis and on the beach, or whether he was, I mean, he was always dealing with fairly big themes.
Well, after all, an awful lot of people are going to think that we're a very shocking pair. Isn't that right, Mrs. Drayton?
I know what you mean.
And I think he had a very strong interest in where the country was going politically and racially.
I believe very much in the government under which I live. I feel that its implementation has been probably the greatest misrepresentation and greatest shortcoming in the history of all political life. And that's where our problem is.
You have to believe that, you know, what you want to remind people about is that great filmmaking is not just about inspiration. I mean, you can't have one without the other. You can have the work ethic, and you can have the desire and the passion, and the two of those things must intersect. And you can tell that people like Kramer, when you see his films, you can see how much work went into those films, making those films. It just seems like they were these monstrous efforts to pull off.
I think Stanley was very critical of Stanley. Stanley never really thought that any of his films quite met his expectations of himself. You know, when you aspire to so much, you try to reach this, you never quite get there. But it seemed to me he got there just fine. In his earlier life, living in Hell's Kitchen, New York, which was considered the armpit of America, and the most dangerous place to be. And I remind you that his father had left his mother when he was a few days old, so he was raised by a single working mother. It's very inspiring, you know, living in that kind of atmosphere, raising an only child. She must have been an awfully good mother, because he had really very strict values from the very beginning, and maybe what was surrounding him helped shape him.
Coming from Hell's Kitchen, we had passed that. We passed that ridiculous saying that it's not impossible for a black man to be in love with a white woman. Come on.
When Stanley Kramer started in this business, he started originally as a writer. And he made his living as a screenplay writer as well as a radio writer, and then an editor, and then a senior editor for about 13 years before he became an associate producer first. And then he was drafted, and then he came out, and with friendships in the Army that he had met, he formed a little company, the Stanley Kramer Company, and they began to make movies. During that time, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was our president, and Eleanor Roosevelt, I think, made great impact on Stanley. So much so that he wrote to her about the Marian Anderson situation where she was not allowed to sing the national anthem because she was black, and Eleanor stood up and said, as long as I'm First Lady, she's singing that anthem. That instilled something in him, so that when he brought short stories, as he brought 2 short stories in the very early part of his producing career in his company, one dealt with prize fighting. Well, prize fighting he understood quite well. He was in that area of prize fighting, and people were becoming prize fighters to get out of the slums. And he knew what a dirty racket it really was.
I think Stanley Kramer, as a producer, was amazing. He was amazing. He went out, he found material, he had an attitude that was socially conscious, he was pushing the envelope.
I just felt he was a powerful producer. In other words, they were very strong ideas. Judgment at Nuremberg. I mean, you know, this guy was making big movies on huge subjects.
I didn't discover the other Stanley Kramer until years later, which is the scrapping, independent producer who really broke ground.
Stanley was the first independent filmmaker. Not very many people know that, because he wasn't a chess beater. Look what I did. Look, he wasn't that kind of man. But he was the first independent to come along and raise his own money and make his own films. Of course, he paved the way. He paid the price, but he paved the way for the rest of us today.
When he first came to Hollywood to make his first films, the story goes he borrowed money from lettuce growers up in the San Joaquin Valley.
There's not too much sense in thinking, well, you start at the bottom and you work your way up. That used to be the old American dream. But really, if you have a dream, it's easier to promote $250,000 from a retired lettuce grower and make the film, make the dream, than it is to get a job at MGM.
I first met Stanley back in, I think, the late 70s. We did a movie called Runner Stumbles together. And I was very excited to be working with him because he had made a movie with my father, I think it was in the 40s, called Home of the Brave. Stanley produced it. Home of the Brave was a huge movie. I don't think any movies had ever been done that touched on racism. That film really speaks to what Stanley was about his whole career. He was into lifting up rocks and exposing the ills of our society.
You sure you know what you're doing?
Well, of course I know what I'm doing.
Charlie could be part to blame, but let's try and get these guys out of town.
Sure, these kids will be going tomorrow. You and I have to still make a living here.
He also understood filmmaking. He had to select these directors. When you choose, recent German immigrants who have fled Europe, who are here with all of this Eastern European talent and style, I give him credit for that.
Then the director started to get stronger under the leadership of George Stevens and Freddie Zinman and William Wyler and Billy Wilder. The director was always considered the auteur, of the film, because they were in control of the performances and where to put the camera and how to tell the story, and they hired everybody. And So I think Stanley recognized that. And he kind of said, well, I'll do it myself. I'll be the director.
Stanley only wanted to be a director. But at that time, in the 40s and 50s and sometimes in the 60s, the director had no say-so. It was the producer's film, not the director.
I came into the business like the late 50s, early 60s, and it was a producer's Hollywood then, and then it swung around. So I thought that the director was slowly getting some power, and Stanley decided to do both, which I think was terrific, and did both very well.
See, people say to me, what do you want to do in films? I say, well, I'd like to go back in time and work with Stanley Kramer. People say to me, why do you want to go work with Scorsese? Because Scorsese is the Stanley Kramer of his generation.
I think he had known he had a very good life because, you know, if you look back on his life, he didn't make films just for profit. He never really had any money. He didn't really make it for glory. But when you look back on his life, you know he made it for something a hell of a lot more important than those issues, for sure.
Dad, you're my father. I'm your son. I love you. I always have, and I always will. But you think of yourself as a colored man. I think of myself as a man.
But one thing that stands out about a Stanley Kramer film is that there is a principle and there is an ethic. There is a reason for making the movie. There is a value, which you can't say about a lot of producers.
Yeah, and isn't it strange, after all these years, when you play with values and ethics and the things in which you believe very strongly, that you arrive at a point where, at least having done these things, in which I believed, I've arrived at a point today where I'm searching again for value, asking myself as well as asking people in terms of the work I do just as strongly, in what do you believe?
You know, Kramer was a guy who was a very reserved and very private guy and wanted the work to speak for him itself. Hopefully this is the beginning of the effort to reintroduce to people this guy who made all of these remarkable films.
He waved the flag for all us filmmakers who need to know that if you believe in it and you push hard and you deliver the goods in a way that is quite artistic and quite relevant, that it can be done.
I remember one comment that just happened to pop into my head. We were standing out on a road waiting for a prop truck or a sound truck or something was late. We're just standing out on this lonely highway, and he said, you know, I've been directing for 40 years. 5 of it has been spent doing exactly this, just standing and waiting.
Well, he was so sweet, he was so modest, overly modest. He never took himself seriously. He took the work seriously, but never himself. What he enjoyed most was coming home to his family at 6 o'clock for dinner. He never missed dinner at 6 o'clock. We always came first. I always said, you had been a better filmmaker had we not been first in your life. But how lucky was I?
Now, at this time in our lives, we need the spirit of Stanley Kramer more than ever. And those films hold up. They're beautiful films, and they speak very dramatically and very profoundly to human problems that we still have today. You know, the whole idea of respecting somebody even when they're different. I mean, think of all those great films he made about that.
Films are forever, and someone's always showing them. If they're good, if they mean something, if they have something to say, if they move us to laughter or tears. And I think that's Stanley's legacy, that he had made so many films that we see today, just as if they were made yesterday.
Guess Who's Coming to Dinner is celebrating its 40th anniversary. But the filmmaker behind that extraordinary social instrument and social entertainment was also behind, as a producer and a director, some of the most amazingly socially conscientious pictures ever made by Hollywood. And when you just read Stanley Kramer's credits, you kind of look at those credits and you say, well, that had to be 6, 7, 8 filmmakers that made this amazing contribution to American cinema and to social reality. But in fact, it all came from one heart and one soul and one incredibly talented visionary. And that's one of my favorite filmmakers of all time, Stanley Kramer.
The Thalberg Award is not given every year, but is voted by the Board of Governors when a candidate is deemed deserving. The rules state that it shall be given to that individual who has been responsible for the most consistent, high quality of motion picture production for the current awards year and 4 preceding years. In 1962, we have happily succumbed. It is my pleasure and honor to present the Irving C. Thalberg Memorial Award to Mr. Stanley Kramer.
Unfortunately, I did not know Irving Thalberg. However, it is true, believe me, that his mother and my grandmother were bridge partners. Whatever their mutual Valhalla today, I think I would like it most, really like it most, if I thought that Irving Thalberg believed that I might reasonably have deserved this award. My grandmother believes it, believe me. Thank you.
In an era of filmmaking defined by escapism, Stanley Kramer made his mark, his reputation, taking on tough social issues. A fiercely autonomous producer and director, he had broken through the Hollywood blacklist to make independent films before it was fashionable to do so. He vowed, he pledged to use film as a real weapon against discrimination, hatred, prejudice, and excessive power. The films he made often dealt with uncomfortable and serious subjects, and he did it without exploitation or political paranoia. The most controversial topics of his day were addressed in films like The Defiant Ones, which tackled racism, On the Beach, which warned of nuclear holocaust, Inherit the Wind examined the teachings of evolution, Judgment at Nuremberg was a condemnation of genocide, and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner was a daring study of interracial romance. Honored by the Producers Guild with the David O. Selznick Lifetime Achievement Award in 1991, another award now bears his name. The Stanley Kramer Award is given to recognize work that dramatically illustrates provocative social issues. This year's recipient is An Inconvenient Truth. Its power is striking, sobering, like the work of Stanley Kramer. It accomplishes what all great films can. It leaves the viewer shaken, inspired, and hopefully invested.
Thank you very much, Lawrence and Harrison.
It does strike me that the Stanley Kramer Award is probably it's particularly fitting for the producers of An Inconvenient Truth. When Steven Spielberg saluted Stanley Kramer, he said, and I quote, "Not just for the art and passion he put on the screen, but for the impact he has made on the conscience of the world." Just listening again to the list of all those great movies that were spoken about a moment ago by Harrison Ford, gosh, I'm sure you're just like me. You had all these personal aha moments during those movies. It was just fantastic. He brought powerful social issues to the screen that touched our sense of moral responsibility in the same way that this filmmaking team sought to use. And he used the power of the medium to deliver a message, in this case, of planetary import at a time of grave danger. This really is a planetary emergency. And in any case, by doing so, they have helped to create a moment of opportunity where we really do have a new chance to join together to solve the climate crisis. And what a wonderful way to salute the Stanley Kramer legacy.